Who is the most dangerous person at your company right now? You probably think it's the lazy one, the quiet quitter, the one doing the bare minimum to get by. And sure, they are frustrating. They cost you efficiency and the bottom line, but they won't break your company. No. The person who puts your entire business at risk is probably the one you just gave the largest bonus to. The superstar. The top salesperson, the coding genius, the one who hits and exceeds every target every quarter. Because while you're looking at their incredible results, you could be ignoring the cultural debt they could be racking up in the background. And just like financial debt, eventually it needs to be repaid. I spent almost 2 decades in the corporate business and consulting world, and I've seen this pattern happening over and over again. So today, I want to show you the mechanics behind why this happens. And of course, what to do about it before the situation gets out of control. In the late 1990s, if you were in business, there was one company that defined success: Enron. They were known as the smartest guys in the room. They weren't just an energy company, they were a logistics company, a trading platform, a financial machine, and their hiring philosophy was very simple and, at the first glance, very logical. Just hire the absolute smartest people from the best MBA programs and let them fight it out. Their CEO, Jeff Skilling, implemented a performance review system called the PRC.
He instituted a system known as the PRC, or Performance Review Committee. It required that people be graded from a 1 to a 5, and roughly 10% of people had to be a 5, and those people were supposed to be fired.
But internally, it was basically a rank and yank. Every year, employees were graded on a curve. The top 15%, huge bonuses, stock options, status. The bottom 10 or so percent were yanked. Fired. On paper, this sounds like a brutal, cutthroat system, but super high performance, right? Survival of the fittest. That's what Skilling thought too.
Jeff had a very Darwinian view of how the world worked. He was famous for saying once in Enron's early years that money was the only thing that motivated people.
He believed he was building a company of superstars. But he forgot one critical thing about human nature. If I need to be in the top 15% to survive, I have 2 options. Option A, I can perform really, really well regardless of what others do. Or option B, I just make sure you perform really, really badly. Enron didn't create a team. They created a gladiator pit. If a colleague was working on a deal that would help the company but hurt my ranking, I would sabotage it. The high performers at Enron were hitting their individual targets, absolutely. But they were doing it by cannibalizing the rest of the organization.
I think put into a certain kind of environment, people do become very much about themselves and very much about their own opportunity to enrich themselves, and it doesn't matter if they trample over somebody else along the way.
We all know how the story ends. Fraud, bankruptcy, a total collapse of trust. Now, you might say, Alex, I don't run $1 billion energy hedge fund. I run a marketing agency or a construction firm, a dental practice. It doesn't matter. Because the biology of toxic high performance is the same whether you have 10,000 employees or 10. And speaking of biology, let's talk about chickens. An evolutionary biologist named William Meyer at Purdue University decided to run an experiment. He wanted to see if he could breed the most productive chickens on the planet. Chickens that laid the most eggs. So he created 2 flocks. The first one was the average flock. He just picked 9 regular, healthy, cooperative chickens. The second flock was the super flock. He handpicked the 9 most productive hens, the high performers, and put them in a cage together. He let them breed for 6 generations. And do you know what happened? Well, the average flock was actually doing great. They were plump, fully feathered, and their egg production had actually gone up dramatically. But the super flock, when Muir opened the cage, only 3 chickens were left alive. They had packed the other 6 to death.
The super chickens packed each other's eggs and plucked each other's feathers.
And pretty soon the bird would just be naked.
You see, the super chickens had achieved their individual success not by laying more eggs, but by suppressing the productivity of the other chickens. They were bullies. In biology, this is a known survival strategy. But in business, it's a strategic error. This is essentially a parasitic high performance. Think about a salesperson who closes every deal they see but scream at the fulfillment team, causing them to quit. Or a senior developer who writes brilliant code but refuses to document it because they are above it all, so no one else can touch it. On paper, they look like a super chicken. Look at all those eggs, look at their revenue. But if you zoom out, your company is the cage, while the flock inside is getting decimated. If you're thinking that business is not a chicken farm, I agree. Businesses need to grow. To grow, we need revenue, and a superstar salesperson wouldn't hurt. I mean, I'm sure we can handle a few feathers flying if the cash flow is there. Fair enough. But let's crunch some numbers. Because keeping a toxic star isn't just a cultural problem, it's a mathematical one. A few years ago, researchers at Harvard Business School decided to put a price tag on this superstar phenomenon. They analyzed data from over 50,000 workers to answer just one question. Is it better to hire a superstar or avoid a toxic worker? They defined a superstar as the top 1% of productivity. And they defined a toxic worker as someone who repeatedly misbehaves. Sexual harassment, fraud, bullying. And here's what they found. Hiring a superstar, that top 1% performer, added about $5,300 in value to the company's bottom line through increased productivity. That's good, we'll like that. But avoiding a toxic worker saved the company about $12,000 in turnover costs alone. That means a toxic employee is mathematically twice as expensive as a superstar is profitable.
That's not just a number on a spreadsheet. It represents the real cost of losing good people who leave because they're miserable, the hit to productivity when everyone's stressed out, and all the time you'll spend playing referee instead of actually leading.
And that $12,000 is a conservative estimate. It only counts the cost of replacing the people who quit because of the toxicity. It doesn't even count the lawsuits, the lost clients, or the wasted management time. If you include the ripple effect, by some estimates, the number can skyrocket to over $50,000 per toxic hire. So, why do we keep them? Why do so many smart business owners defend the jerk in the corner office? It's because of something called a halo effect. When someone is really good at one thing, like selling, we tend to assume they're good at everything else, or we subconsciously excuse their bad traits. We see the revenue line going up and we get blindsided. We tell ourselves, oh, that's just, what they are, and they're just passionate. But the math doesn't care about passion. The math says you are losing money. So, if super chickens don't work, what does? Well, Google spent millions of dollars trying to answer that exact question. In 2012, they launched Project Aristotle. They studied hundreds of their own teams. Their hypothesis was exactly what you'd expect from Google. The best team is the one with the smartest people.
So here we are, it's 2012, we're at Google. And we can hire pretty much anyone we want. We can hire the best of the best. And we do.
They thought if you take a PhD in astrophysics, an Ivy League gold medalist, and a 10x engineer and put them in a room, you win. But when they looked at the data, they were wrong. The data showed that the who didn't matter nearly as much as the how. The highest performing teams weren't the ones with the highest combined IQs. In fact, some of the smartest teams performed below average.
And some of these teams filled with geniuses are getting nothing done. They can't work together. They're not productive. They're not producing good work. And others are. Other teams are doing well.
The number one predictor of team success was something called psychological safety. Psychological safety. Sounds a little bit like HR fluff, right? But it actually is a KPI that can be measured and strongly correlates with overall performance. It means, can I take a risk, ask a question, or admit a mistake without being embarrassed or punished? In teams with high psychological safety, innovation went up because people weren't afraid to look stupid. But what happens when you introduce a toxic high performer? They destroy that safety. When the star rolls their eyes in a meeting, when they interrupt people, when they steal credit, everyone else stops taking risks. They stop offering ideas, they go into survival mode just like those poor chickens. And just like that, your collective intelligence drops. You might have one genius in a room, but you've turned everyone else into a team of order takers. And that's when creativity and innovation disappear. What about Steve Jobs? Wasn't he demanding, arrogant, uncompromising superstar? Some people say he was an absolute jerk. Does it mean Apple would have been better off firing Jobs? I mean, they did fire him at one point, only to bring him back 12 years later. So it's a fair question, but there is a big difference between very high standards and toxic behavior. Have you heard of the US Navy SEALs? One of the most feared military units in the world. They have much higher stakes than a marketing agency or a dental practice. So for them, every person could mean a life or death difference of an entire group during a special operation. Simon Sinek, who worked with the Navy SEALs, describes a simple framework. It has only two axes. On the vertical axis, you have performance, and on the horizontal one, you have trust. Obviously, everyone wants the person in the top right corner. High performance, high trust. That's your ideal candidate, but extremely difficult to find. And nobody wants the person in the bottom left corner. Low performance, low trust. That's an easy reject. The problem is the other two quadrants, where most people fall under. In a high trust, low performance quadrant, a SEAL would say something like, I may trust you with my life, but I can't trust you to defuse the bomb. So that's a good person, loyal, great for culture, just not skilled enough yet. In business, you can usually train this person. Or you move them to a role that fits them better, but you always try to retain such people. They aren't dangerous, they just need development. But this corner, high performance, low trust, this is the toxic high performer.
Nobody wants this person, the low performer of low trust, of course. Everybody wants this person, the high performer of high trust. This person, the high performer of low trust, is a toxic leader and a toxic team member. And they would rather have a medium performer of high trust, sometimes even a low performer of high trust, it's a relative scale, over this person.
That's the person who can easily throw others under the bus to advance their agenda. And in a firefight, that lack of trust literally gets people hurt or even killed. So let's go back to Steve Jobs. Yes, he was demanding and very rough with his feedback. But if you look closely at the history, this aggression was usually directed at the product quality or somebody not meeting his high standards. His heart was with Apple, and he was mission-centric. He wanted everything to be perfect. The toxic high performers' aggression is usually ego-centric. They don't care as much about a bigger long-term goal. They only want to be at the top. They need to be the smartest person in the room, even if it means making everyone else look dumb.
Try. Don't try, do, okay? I'm CEO of this company because I actually get things done. I do things, I don't just try.
That is a critical distinction. One pushes the team forward, the other holds the company hostage. Okay, egocentric super chickens are not ideal. Fair enough. But what if you already have one in your company? They perform well, clients seem to like them, but you can't shrug off the feeling that you just can't trust them with your company's culture. The standard advice from the top companies is just get rid of them. And Zappos, an online retailer, famously offered new hires thousands of dollars to quit during training.
And about a week into it, Zappos stops the training and says to everybody in the room, basically, we'll pay you for the time you've been here, and if you agree to quit today, we'll give you a $1,000 bonus, no questions asked.
They would rather pay a short-term thinkers to leave early than let them infect the culture later. But those big companies live in a different world. Especially if you run a smaller business, you don't have unlimited resources to keep hiring and firing people. Maybe you have a star employee who controls 40% of your revenue and you're terrified that if you touch them, they quit and take all their clients with you. But that isn't a management problem. That is a risk management problem. And you start solving it with a containment protocol. There's even a term for it. It's called a bus factor. If that star employee got hit by a metaphorical bus tomorrow, what would happen to your firm? Do you lose 40% of your revenue? If the answer is yes, your business is very fragile and you're very exposed. So what you do is you immediately start creating a shadow. You can frame it as a cross-company skill development, which is actually a good idea anyway. But in reality, you'll be mitigating your risk. You're building a backup. At the same time, you would start building a client firewall. You start showing up to their meetings, not to micromanage, but to check on satisfaction, show your face to clients. You remind the client that a whole team supports them, not just one person. If the superstar tries to block you from seeing the client, that is a massive red flag. Typically, they won't be too aggressive about it, but if they are, that means they are openly building leverage against you. Now, once you have the backup and the firewall, you're no longer a hostage. You can now contain the situation. And slowly, you remove their direct access to the support staff they abuse, you stop inviting them to the meetings they disrupt, you build a wall around them where they can still deliver their output, sales, code, whatever. But you always maintain control and leverage. They may not like what you do, but if you do gently and gradually enough, the worst it gets is some grumbles here and there. Ultimately, if they feel they lose power, they could make a move to restore their influence or threaten to leave. But by that time, because you built the redundancies and the firewall slowly, you'll be ready. Ideally, you never even have to deal with something like this. But it's so tempting to hire a super high performer, or maybe a few of them. But building a business is not about collecting a fantasy team of individual superstars. It's about building a flock that can survive together. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the channel, please consider subscribing. Don't forget to sign up for our Business Excellence newsletter, and see you in the next video.